Morning. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Infrastructure Services Committee on Thursday, June 18th, 2020. And I'd like to acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is within the traditional territories of the Sechelt Nation and the Squamish Nation. We have an agenda before us. And there are some minor changes to it. The first change is that we are moving, we're going to have our delegation. We're going to go briefly in camera with our delegation, and then we're going to come back into the public meeting. Is there anything else that people would? Can I see a motion to adopt the agenda?
Point of order.
Yes.
In the agenda, under which segment of the Local Government Act are we going in camera?
It's in the amended agenda. It's section.
Thank you. I will find that.
Of the community charter. So there was also an additional piece of communication. So, calling the question, who is in favor of the agenda? Any opposed? Thank you. The agenda is adopted. And next, I would like to welcome Ned Hoddley of TELUS regarding expansion plans for the Sunshine Coast.
Thank you.
You're on mute now for some reason. Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us today. I believe I have a few of my partners in crime, or at least partners, in the invite as well. I don't see them on the invite in the Zoom session, but I'll assume they're on the bridge. My name is Ned Hoddley. I'm the TELUS General Manager for Central BC, which also includes the Sunshine Coast. We're excited to be here, and I'll introduce some of the people that I have on the call with me that will speak to various components of our business. The in-camera session that you referenced earlier is where we will be sharing future potential opportunities that we're investigating on the Sunshine Coast, but we will do a bit of a brief update for the public forum before we go into in-camera. Let me start by introducing a few people on it. If they could just say something to make sure we can hear them and that they're on the call when I do introduce them. Many of us either live on the coast, have close friends or family on the coast, so this is definitely near and dear to our hearts. I'll start with Ben Bajaj, who's our Director of Business Strategy Development and Local Government Relations and Custom Footprints. Ben, are you on?
I am on. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Yes, we can hear you. Thanks, Ben.
Great. Thanks to be here.
We also have Doug Anastos, who's our expert on engineering operations and implementation for wireless. Doug, are you with us?
Hi, Ned. Yep, here as well.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Chris Clammer. Many of you may know him. He lives in Gibson these days, the Regional Operation Manager for the Sunshine Coast. Chris, are you with us? We might have lost him. I know his intent was to be here, but he probably had as much fun downloading Zoom as I did. We don't usually use it. So we'll see. We'll have Chris join at a later time if possible. We'll ping him in the background. So today we'll give you a view into our wireline and wireless investment on the Sunshine Coast.
I'm here, Ned. Sorry, I was muted on the bridge and not on my phone. My apologies. I'm on the call.
No, fantastic. Thanks, Chris. So today we'll give you a view into our wireline and wireless investment on the Sunshine Coast, and if I'm smart enough to do this, I'll try and share a slide and turn it over to Ben Bajaj to speak to it, if that's okay, Ben.
That'd be great.
Does that work? Perfect. Okay. Now the trick will be, how do I share a slide on Zoom?
Team, as you can tell, we're actually at Google House, so we're fumbling our way through Zoom here a little bit, but it's really not that different. we work through it. So as Ned brings up the slide, I'll start a bit of a opening with respect to one, when I look at the region in terms of the Sunshine Coast Regional District, it's been an area of significant investment for TELUS over the last 7 or 8 years. In fact, with respect to our pure fiber, which has really been a significant focus of myself and my team, as we've engaged with governments across Alberta and BC, where in 2013 we moved to an approach whereby we would blanket an entire community with fiber optics. So in other words, a direct fiber connection to each household and each business. And when we started the program, we decided to really start with smaller communities for a couple of reasons. One, we knew that a lot of the smaller communities outside of the major urban areas had networks that were in need of upgrades. And if we're going to be making upgrade investments, it probably makes a lot more sense to leapfrog and move to the next generation of technology, which in our case, when we think about wired network technology, it's fiber. So it's that next generational investment for us. Like copper has served us immensely well for the last 100 years, our expectation is fiber will serve us immensely well for the next 100. And as we're laying the fiber along the poles or in conduits where we have buried infrastructure, over time, of course we'll have to continue to upgrade, but it's typically just the endpoints, the equipment in each end, whereas the fiber in between becomes that long-term asset that we can continue to utilize for generations to come. And in the case of the Sunshine Coast, 4 of our first communities were on the coast. Specifically Gibsons, Seashell, Pender Harbor, and Powell River. And, we started our program with 9 communities, half of which were in BC and half of which were in Alberta. And I'm proud to say that Sunshine Coast was one of our initial priority areas. So in total, as building out our pure fiber network, as well as some of the enhanced wireless that came along with it, that we're able to attach to the fiber optics network, it's amounted to a $43 million investment, and effectively gives connectivity, again, that direct fiber connectivity, which today our fastest speed on the market is 1.5 gigs. Which is significant in terms of any household needs, and really even allows professionals in the graphic or video design industry to be able to work quite seamlessly from home, whether their head office is in Los Angeles or it's in North Vancouver. That's very seamless with that level of speed, as well as the latency in terms of the delay times between connections and response times from various networks around the world. 25,000 households and businesses have been connected across the region as a result of that investment. Ned, were you able to get the slide up, or?
Yes, tell me if you can't see that.
I can't, but as long as everyone else can, that's all that matters.
No, we can't see it yet. So if you choose share, then you actually have to choose the window, and there's one.
I enabled
Thought I did.
multiple.
Let me try that again.
Ah,
Yeah. This is better.
Yeah.
I shared, but I didn't select the window. Thank you for that. Okay.
Yeah, Ned, there we go, presentation mode. So as I had mentioned, so if you look up and down the coast, you see sort of right from Gibsons up to Powell River, we blanketed those 4 communities with fiber optics, and effectively equates to a $43 million investment and connects over 25,000 individual premises.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. And would you like us to pause for questions here, or go to the next slide and then open it up after that?
why don't we keep going? I'll keep an eye out for questions.
Wonderful. So Doug, I'll turn it over to you to speak to some of the things that are happening in our wireless world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ned. Yeah, I thought it would be a good idea just to pause here and just to explain a bit about what TELUS has done in the past, and then what we're doing now, and then importantly as well, what we'd like to do in the future. And I think that part's important because we want to make sure that we're aligned with our priorities and the regional district's priorities as well. So, and I think in large part, they are naturally aligned because there are some coverage limitations in the regional district that everybody is mostly aware of. But the question becomes, how do we prioritize those areas? And so, it's just something to keep in mind, I guess, as we have this conversation. I'd be interested to hear from the board, the committee, on that point. So, TELUS has done over the years quite a bit of work trying to improve cell service on the coast here. Through different strategies, different types of wireless installations. We have built some cell towers, for instance. We also have deployed a lot of what are known as small cells, so very small boxes that we can, deploy in areas that have poor coverage. And what we're doing, so we've deployed hundreds of those actually over, since 2014. And if we look at where we're at right now at this moment in time in terms of what we have to share, I can speak to small cells, but also to our cell towers, our macro sites that we have planned. And I'd be happy to chat a bit more about the differences between those types of installations and what they are and what they are best suited for as well. But on the screen here, so you can see a couple different red marks. There's a mark down by, a bullet down there by Roberts Creek. So this is a proposed site. Just bringing it to the attention of the committee today for information. This is a site, it's a tower proposed at the Roberts Creek Fire Hall, and we will be returning, shortly at a future board meeting to ask for support from the regional district for that proposal. So there's an approval component to that one. But really what that is trying to do, it's something that we're partnering with the regional district in terms of building a structure that then can accommodate regional district emergency services equipment as well. But really the intent is to fill in a gap in highway coverage there, as well as the community of Roberts Creek and surrounding areas. So this is the main area that we've identified south of Seashell that still is requiring wireless service upgrades. Now, north of Seashell, there's quite a few more, but when we're looking at what we've done, in this area, and this south of Seashell, this is still the main problematic area. So that's a proposal at this point. And then just west or north of Seashell there's another red dot. And this site is one that this is actually co-located on an existing tower. But TELUS has had some coverage limitations along that section of Highway 101 as well, coming out of Seashell. And that's the purpose of this site, is to address those, to enable people to, have good call quality all the way, out of Seashell. And that site may be going on air today, so it's quite recent and relevant. Should if not today, then later this week. In addition to these two, we don't have them on the map, but I talked a bit about small cells and small cell technology. I mean, it's really quite different than a cell tower. As you can sort of imagine, these two red dots on the screen would be providing coverage to, in addition to the sites that we have, a broad area throughout Highway 101 through here. Small cells, alternatively, are little boxes on wood utility poles that really only provide about 100 or 200 meters of service. So different tool in the toolkit. What we did here is, try to take a look at what are some of the areas along Highway 101 that we could address with small cells. Small cells really aren't well suited for highway corridors. Really, you do need good macro sites and that umbrella of coverage in place. But there are a few different places, and so there's a couple areas around Roberts Creek, closer to Seashell, that wouldn't be picked up by the tower, and we are deploying some small cells there. So to fill a little gap there, that with the tower would provide good coverage. And then as you're driving north from Seashell, there's a bit of a break in coverage along Half Moon Bay on the highway. And so that's another area that we've identified for small cells as well. And then finally in Egmont, there's a few more small cells planned for there. One, for instance, down at the Skookumchuck Narrows trailhead. So another example of how we can try to, take a targeted approach to achieve some more service upgrades. And all of those should be up and running by mid-July is what we're thinking. So that's what we have planned right now. And as I mentioned before, would be interested to understand what some of the other priorities are from the committee. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Doug. We'll open it up to questions and then head into in camera for some further information, if that's okay with everyone.
That's great with me. If directors have questions, you can raise your virtual hand. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to clear up what pure fiber is. Just as a layperson, I don't know what is pure. What is pure fiber? I guess that's the simple.
Sure. Thing. Yeah. So pure fiber is effectively you've got a fiber connection right into your home or your business. So it's fiber right from the household of the business all the way back to the TELUS central office. So in each community, we'll have effectively a network hub, which is really housed in a small building where all of our network gear and switching equipment will be. And then from there, that'll connect back to the core network, which effectively will take you all the way back to Vancouver and then onto the global network. So, in other words, you've got an end-to-end fiber optic connection, whereas if you look at our copper network today, it'll usually be fiber into the network hub, sometimes fiber into the neighborhood, and then that last segment will be copper, which usually that's the limiting factor. And then there's also a number of other characteristics or drawbacks with copper in terms of the impact that weather or cross interference can have on it, and it is also very distance dependent. So the further you are from that node or that equipment that's serving the internet connection, the lower your speeds will be. In the case of fiber, it doesn't matter if you're right next to our central office where our hub and our equipment is, or you're 5 kilometers away. You're experiencing the exact same quality of connection in terms of speed, as well as in terms of latency. And latency is important, and it's often a term that's not talked about regularly. But basically, that's response times. And when you think about a video connection like this, you'll experience jitter if you have higher latency. And then when you sort of move into our IoT automated world where we have devices moving all across the household or the business, or when we talk about the wireless network in terms of automated cars, latency becomes very important in terms of responsiveness. So there's a number of characteristics and benefits of fiber, but physically speaking, it's end-to-end true fiber optics. And when you look at some of the other competitors, and they'll sort of make references to fiber or fiber plus or fiber edge or things of that, the question is it fiber from sort of point A to point B, or does it stop somewhere in between, and then does it intermediate to copper or wireless or some other form, which typically then becomes a bit of a gap in terms of some of the quality and performance that you'll experience, because the science behind it, the physics behind it, says that fiber can't be replicated. It can be emulated to get fiber-like characteristics, but not quite the same. Does that help?
Yes. So just a follow-up. So there is still some copper infrastructure on the Sunshine Coast then? Absolutely.
Yeah, there is. So I highlighted the 4 communities that we've done complete fiber builds. That's not the only fiber infrastructure. So there'll be a number of businesses that maybe over time have ordered specialized business connections or new developments. typically we'll build out new subdivisions, multiple dwelling units, or business developments with fiber optics, because again, it makes sense for us to go to the latest technology versus utilizing old, and then potentially look at leapfrogging in the future. But still, there will be many of the outlying areas or a number of the smaller communities that will be based on copper networks. And it's still a network that we continue to invest in. We maintain. Ned and his team do a fantastic job in terms of maintaining and servicing the network. But our goal is to invest in pure fiber across Alberta and BC, where we can, look to seek a return on that investment. And when I say return, it is really a long-term view. Typically to break even on a pure fiber optic network, it's a multi-year return, and typically something over 10 years.
Yeah. And so Ben, just for clarity on this, so on the Sunshine Coast holistically, I believe we cover over 95% of the population with pure fiber. Is that correct?
I believe so, but I would go by your knowledge, given sort of your more intimate knowledge of the region. So.
Yeah. My understanding is we're well over 95% of the population that is covered. From Gibson's all the way to Powell River.
Thank you. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding at the moment, and I may be wrong, fiber optic cable is non-recyclable currently. Is that correct?
You know what? I have never received that question, so I'll have to take it away and come back to you. Effectively, it's a glass-based material. But I'm not sure of the recycling detail on it.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one question. How were things during the during the COVID surge in online usage here on the coast?
Yeah. So actually, you know what? If you wouldn't mind, I'll answer the previous question and that one. I just wanted to add a little bit of detail in terms of sustainability. So whilst I can't necessarily talk about the exact recycling characteristics, and I will go back and find some more detail, there are significant environmental and community benefits attached to fiber optics. And one of which is the fact that because it's passive, and again, it sort of goes back to the science behind it, but it's a light-based signal, and we don't need equipment out in the field, in the community, to switch, actively switch signals. So in other words, we have cabinets, and they're basically passive splitters. So the benefit or the importance of that from an environmental point of view is you don't have any power, you don't have any cooling, because you don't have any active equipment. It's all passive splitters. So in other words, you don't have any of that emission and the noise that goes along with that. And then as well in terms of the reliability, so whether there's flooding or other type of weather events, you're not getting equipment that's out in the field that's shorting either. So from a disaster recovery point of view, there's significant benefits. And I'll just sort of highlight a quick example is that two flooding seasons ago, so I guess we're basically going back to not last spring, but the spring before, in Grand Forks, where Grand Forks experienced significant flooding in the community. That is one of our pure fiber communities, and their flooding was to the level where it was up over just up to the height of the equipment of our fiber optic cabinets. So we have a cabinet in each community, and we didn't experience any loss of service, even though the cabinet was fully submerged in water, because again, there's no active equipment. A backhoe that was working on the flood relief effort backed up, knocked over the cabinet, and we lost one connection because it physically became disconnected. So it sort of speaks to, at least from a community benefits and also from an environmental perspective in terms of putting some of that leading technology in the field. There's definitely benefits there. Sorry, Donna, your question was?
about how you dealt with the surge in traffic
COVID.
during COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. So each of the networks is different. So I'll speak to our general approach and then kind of what we've experienced. So definitely there's been significant uplift in usage, and it's primarily on our wireline network. Although Doug can correct me if I'm wrong in a moment here. But whilst many people are at home, obviously they're very dependent on the network, and so we've seen a huge surge in usage. So we've moved into what we call our emergency management mode, and so not only are we, very closely watching our operations and trying to keep our people safe, but we're also very closely in an operations mode, watching utilization of the network and making sure that it's up and running, and we're proactively addressing issues as we see them. So typically, as we monitor the utilization across communities, we're basically looking at it at the device or the node level, and we're seeing on each equipment or each box in the network what the utilization levels are, and if they start to reach our thresholds, that triggers for us activities around what we can do to augment that device, whether it's adding more capacity, looking at more network feed coming into it from the core, or basically deploying another box or more shelves in the box so that we've got more ports. It really depends on the situation, but we're very rigorously managing that, and we have triggered, in a number of communities, investments where we're seeing a need. I'm happy to say, though, with our pure fiber communities, we've had to make very minimal incremental investments because that network is built with capacity for the future in mind. So again, like I said, fiber optics is very, very scalable, and it's performed immensely well. I think in one or two communities we have had to add some capacity coming into the community, but again, that was out of an abundance of caution and well ahead of what we think they'll need. But once again, we'll continue to monitor the network. Doug, was there anything you wanted to add from a wireless perspective in terms of utilization and some of the activity that your team is driving?
Yeah, sure, Ben. Yeah, and further to what Ben was saying, actually, in areas where we have a large amount of pure fiber, the wireless network similarly is less burdened. And what I mean by that is, in rural areas where the wireless network is perhaps the only option for high-speed internet access, and that would be through TELUS's Smart Hub product. So home-based internet access, where you access the internet through the nearest cell site, basically. In those areas, and there are some in the regional district, not as many as other rural areas in the province. We've seen with people working from home, a lot of different capacity upgrades required in order to continue to deliver that service. And as you can imagine, it's there's people all of a sudden not going into the office, working from home, watching a lot of Netflix. There are some capacity considerations there for the wireless network. But that's not the case where we have pure fiber, because people just use pure fiber instead of the wireless network. Beyond that, I think we could probably all understand as well. Uptick in voice calls, people, especially earlier on when when trying to stay in touch with friends and family and through the social distancing and that sort of thing as well. Though voice calls don't require capacity upgrades to our network, it's a bit of a different thing, but certainly seeing trends there as well. So. Good,
thank you. I don't see any further questions in the queue. Perhaps at this point you could unshare your screen. Aha!
That work?
Yeah, that's much better. It's challenging here for me to manage when I'm seeing 3 screens at once. Director Hilst, do you have another question?
Yeah, I just wanted to draw attention to the Gibson's Public Library played a role in helping Christensen Village connect with the TELUS Ambassador program for some hardware for the people in the care facility to participate. So that's part of this COVID, where there is more use, and the TELUS Ambassador program stepped in. I don't know all the details, Jeff. I was just mentioning that this is one of the ways that TELUS has stepped up in terms of the COVID issue.
Thank you for mentioning that. I think that's a great point, and our community support goes beyond providing a fiber network and a wireless network for people that live on the Sunshine Coast. And Chris, feel free to top up, but we've also contributed in multiple areas, including working with Seashell Hospital Foundation as well as the Gibson's Public Market. We've contributed to from a technology perspective to ensure that people can stay connected in various pockets, as well as individual support for the charities on the Sunshine Coast, including the food bank, as well as our ambassadors, as just mentioned, are very active in supporting community events. Chris, anything you want to top up in that regard?
Just during COVID, we had some excess capacity, and we lent that out to deliver groceries to elderly and those in need. When we had downtime, that was a well-received action.
Perfect.
Good.
Thank you. So that's just a taste of some of the activities I think we've done. We've made it our mission to help during the COVID crisis, because we realize this is not just about technology. This is about humanity, and we want to ensure that we're there to support the communities that need it.
Good. Thank you. I don't see any further questions in the queue, so I'm going to entertain a motion to go in camera, that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with Section 91K of the Community Charter, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are in their preliminary stages, and that, in the view of the council, could be reasonably expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. Being the motion seconded, all in favor? Okay, we are going to go in camera for a few minutes. IT, are we ready? Thank you very much. We are resuming the public portion of the Infrastructure Services Agenda. I would, at this point, entertain a motion to receive all reports and communications. Moved, seconded, all in favor? All right, everything is received.
Excuse me, could we just say thank you to our TELUS presenters, and if they would like to leave, they're welcome to leave. They're welcome also to stay with us for the rest of the meeting. Thanks, Ned.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great day, everyone.
Donna, I was wondering if there was any public that would like to ask questions of TELUS, or if we would, if they would be interested in entertaining that concept.
Yeah, I think.
Actually,
Go ahead.
it might be easier if you gave an email that people could email you. We can take questions online, but it's not everybody negotiates that the chat thing successfully.
Yeah,
So-
Len has my email. So Len, please feel free to share if there's any questions or anything that comes up. I've lost half my delegation, so the effectiveness of answering some of the questions may not be as good. So I'm happy to answer them through email if anybody wants to forward.
Okay, I'll do that. We can put that into the minutes then.
Okay,
Thanks.
Thank you, Ned, for
Right.
coming.
good conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks folks for keeping me in line here. Our next item of business is a water supply update from our general manager.
Good morning, everybody. I will share my screen as well. And go to this one. And let's see if it works. Yeah, there we go. So I want to provide you with an overview of the water supply update as it is today, June 18th, 2018. As usual, I start with snowpack. As indicated before, early May is always the last moment that we actually do a snow survey at our lakes. We found early May that snowpacks were comparable to 2019, which was significantly less than in 2018. And currently at the lakes, most snow has been melted away by now. There are some spots left. But at the weather station, at the higher elevation, there is still some more snow than last year at that elevation. And that's good news because that means that snow melt has been lower than last year, which means that we will go to stage 2 at a later date than last year. But it's still a little bit less snow than there was in 2018. So, but I'll speak about that more later on in the presentation. And the snow melt is really important for us because when the snow melt has the snow has been all melted, then it's really precipitation that will provide us with the water supply for the rest of the summer. In terms of the weather, it has been cool and wet, and which is good in terms of water supply. It really reduces snow melt and also reduces the demand. And you will see that in the future slides. Upcoming 2 weeks, the weather forecast is still cooler than normal, but this is the most recent graph from Environment Canada. There's still potential for a warmer than normal summer, and otherwise it would be a regular summer. But that still does not mean anything in terms of actual precipitation. There is no strong indication or if it will be a dry or a wet summer. In terms of demand, this is the demand since January 1st for the Chapman system. And it's very obvious that our winter consumption for the Chapman system is just below 10,000 cubic meters a day. And in April, there was a warm weather spike and it went up And the next slide, what I will going to do is I will graph the red line is the temperature. So what you can see here is that there is a clear connection between temperature and actual consumption in the system. And the moments when the temperature did drop a little bit, and in this area last several days, and here in mid-May, those were days that we had significant amount of rain. So it immediately had an impact on the overall consumption. We did some analysis with our residential water data for the areas A, B, D, E, and F. And this is the trend since January. So until March, it was about 400 liters a day on average. And in May, at the end of May, we were over 700. So you can really see a clear increase since March. And we think there are two reasons for this. One is temperature, more outdoor use, and the other one is people working from home, COVID impact, COVID effect. What does it mean in terms of water conservation stages? So stage 1 is in effect since May 1st. Eastbourne is at stage 2 and will continue to be there. Stage 2 for the regional water system, because there is still some snow melt, but I expect that will be melted away in upcoming weeks. I think we have to go to stage 2 late June, early July-ish. There is still potential for that we have to go to stage 3, stage 4. It all really depends on how the rain, if we get rain amounts in July and August, and what the actual water demand is. In the graph at the bottom shows when we went to which stage last several years. Blue is stage 2, yellow is stage 3, orange is, no, blue is 1, yellow is 2, orange is 3, and red is 4. So you can really see that even though in 2018 it was later in the year that we went to stage 3, 2, we still ultimately have to go to stage 3. So it's really all dependent on the amount of rain we get in August, July, August, if we need to go to stage 3 and 4 or not. In terms of engagement, public engagement, to date, this year we issued 9 warnings and 24 permits for residents that are putting in new lawns. And in both cases, those numbers are lower than previous years, and it's primarily due to the fact that it has been raining and cooler. And as a result, less outdoor use. Some highlights in terms of our leak resolution program. In the Elphinstone, Roberts Creek, and Pender area, we've been able to work with residents to address some major leaks that were identified in our recent meter reads, which was a great success because these are all significant volumes. In most cases, the residents were not aware of the fact that they even had a volume, even had a leak, which is as well the case for the Elphinstone resident that provided this quote. In terms of other engagement opportunities, last month we introduced a monthly water use update program for residents with a meter, and we currently have over 70 subscriptions. More is always welcome. And since last week on our YouTube channel, we have a weekly water update video, and this week's video will be posted later today or early tomorrow morning. And that was my presentation.
That was great. Thank you very much. I particularly liked the graph showing the stages and when they were implemented. And I would love a copy of that graph going back another few years, just so that we can, because that just works really well visually to get the message across. I recognize Director Pratt.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to reiterate and concur with your comments that it'd be great to see the graph going back to previous years. I really want to say how much I appreciate that weekly water update video. That's a terrific initiative, and thank you so much for starting that, Remco, GM, and your team. It's a great little, like this is where we're at right now, and so looking forward to seeing how that the community uptake on that as well.
Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I really enjoyed that presentation. I liked the graph at the bottom. That was great. I'd just like to confirm that we go from stage 1 to stage 2 when the water stops going over the dam. I think that's correct, but I'd like to be sure.
Yeah, usually we go to stage 2 at the time when the snow melt is gone, the water levels in the lake are dropping and are stop flowing over the dam. So because from that point onwards, the only water we have left is actually the water in the reservoir. So that's when we usually call stage 2.
And a follow-up question. I don't see any more hands then. Will we go to stage 3 a little earlier than usual to try and avoid stage 4, something similar to what we did in 2019? Will that happen again in 2020?
Yeah, I can confirm that this year we will take a similar approach to last year, where if we feel that it's warranted, that is required to prevent stage 4, in order for us to achieve not to go to stage 4, to prevent that from happening, we will go to a stage 3 at an earlier date, yes. But it's way too early yet in terms of total demand and supply and whether to provide any indication when that would happen. But it will, last year, the experience and the feedback we received back from the public was that they appreciated that over going to stage 4 for a significant amount of time.
And one last question then. I thought that those comments on leaks and the volume fixed was very relevant, especially when we are in fact considering water meters. And it's one of the very strong reasons to go to water meters, and finding those leaks is definitely an indication of success. Could we get some history on water saved because of leaks fixed in the areas that are metered? That seems to me like it's a good thing for us to get out into the public if we can.
Yeah, what I will do is I will, there has been reports, board reports with that information, and I'll make sure that there is some updated information also included in my next month's water supply update.
Thank you very much. I run out of questions. It's great.
Good. Thank you. I see Director Toth.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to staff for putting together those weekly update videos. They're great. It was a bit of a surprise when I discovered the first one. Those 3 leaks that were highlighted in the May report combined are 1.4% of our daily usage in 3 connections alone. And those are leaks that we may not have discovered, at least in any sort of short order, without the meters in place. The probes, the sensors, things like that, they're not as rapid response as the meters are. So.
Good. I do not see any further hands. No further questions for staff on our favorite topic. All right. Director Lee.
Yes, I've been getting the monthly report, and I've started my own spreadsheet so I can see year over year, because we got it for the first one, but not the second one, which it's not a problem for me, but it brought to mind what is an average per person, per use. For instance, I would say there's an average of 2 people in each household, but some households have 4 or 5 people. So is there an average? I think I know the answer. I don't think we have an average per person in our area, but is there an average per person that is industry standard, and we most likely are comparable to by doing a sample of a few houses?
There are several answers I can provide. There is we can always calculate an average household usage, but it's always per household for the area. We have calculations, that calculation done for the entire Sunshine Coast. I think 500 something, 500 liters a day, but that is on average per year. And so it always depends on the month to month. There is a calculator, there's a tool out there on the internet. There's a link on the website, the SOD website, where you can calculate what your usage would be based on your behavior. However, it's not as accurate as your actual data you receive. So I think the best way is really to compare it with last year and the year prior, and to have that drive your own behavioral changes.
Okay. By the way, getting the monthly water updates from staff is excellent to track my own water usage. So that's been good, and several people have written in to me to tell me that they signed up to and were quite happy with it. I did have one other question, which was last month we noticed that the water usage in the rural areas had gone up while the water usage in the town had gone down, which is not very surprising, seeing as how a lot of people in the rural areas work in Gibsons and the businesses were closed. Have we seen a shift again with more, the rural areas going down and the town going up?
I had a conversation with senior staff at the town yesterday, and they've seen an increase, a similar pattern over the last several months as we've seen for the rural areas, So they haven't seen a real decline in usage. If you compare March, April, May, it has been a steady trend up there as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I do not see any further questions in the queue. I have a request to take a break. We're at 10:56 a.m. And so this seems like a good time for a 9-minute break. Can we start again at 11:05? Okay. Thank you. We're all back from our break with bright shining faces again. I just wanted to say that although it is nice to be able to sit here in bare feet in my pajama bottoms, that I really miss that interaction of a live meeting. I'll be looking forward to when we can get back together again, because I think there's a lot of energy in the room when you're all there in person, and particularly when we have delegations. You know, your faces are pretty familiar to me, but it's nice to meet delegations in person. All right, the next item on our agenda is the YMCA wastewater treatment plant update, and over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. I can say that I'm not wearing my pajamas this morning. I do have clothes on, but we're here to talk about the YMCA wastewater treatment plant update. The YMCA wastewater treatment plant transfer of ownership and associated easements is a very challenging task to get completed due to the many lenses required. Legal agreements, service area amendments, past commitments, and rates all need to be assessed. If all of the previously mentioned tasks are achieved, there's an opportunity to connect the Langdale wastewater plant to the YMCA plant, which would require all of the same tasks to be completed along with the financial impact, engineering, construction of new infrastructure, and required funding. A feasibility study conducted by a professional engineer will greatly assist and provide clarity for this required work to move forward. Langdale wastewater plant's poor condition needs to be addressed soon. Over the last few years, staff have met with YMCA representatives, and both parties would like to arrive at a conclusion soon. Thus, staff are recommending moving forward with the feasibility study prior to any grant approval or any possible grant approval. Thank you.
Okay, do I see any hands up from directors thinking about Area F? Haha, there we go, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Yeah, it would be, the community has been waiting for some time. This project actually goes back to 2007 when the YMCA first looked at expanding its Camp Elphinstone. So yeah, it's been on the books for a long time. It looks like it's a necessary work that has to be done. And one of the major pieces I'm asking of staff is the condition assessment of a 6 to 8 year old plant, and that potentially it looks like, as I understand it, the SCRD would maybe take over the ongoing asset management of the YMCA plant. So informing the people who it affects and how much it will cost is of a significant concern for myself. And in terms of transparency, if there was a way for staff and elected and perhaps the public to get in and actually look at what this facility looks like before too long, so we can actually have a bit of an image of what this facility looks like. Because back in 2012, there was a lot of shiny stuff being built, and over years, the shiny stuff becomes less shiny. And so I'm very interested in the condition assessment of the YMCA and the tying together. And I think staff is also looking at an exploration of some kind of a joint venture to assist the YMCA with the operating expenses. So this is also something that's up for consideration for the board to whether to direct staff to look at. That's on page 2, about third paragraph in the discussion. So yeah, I'll leave it there and look for people to talk.
Staff, did you have any comments on a shiny sewage plant?
Most plants aren't shiny, wastewater plants, but it's working fine. It's in it's in 5-year-old condition. It's had a repair a couple years ago on one fitting inside the plant, but other than that, I think it's been general maintenance. There was cost associated to diving the outfall, which is a requirement. and replacing things like UV bulbs, which are very expensive, but those are, general maintenance.
And I think in terms of a visit about public, yes, we'll, as part of the engagement we'll organize later this year for several of the treatment plants, we'll make sure that there is an opportunity for the board and the community to actually see the infrastructure themselves. And yeah.
If I can just add to that, Remco, the YMCA has a very strict policy about people entering their property. Of course, it would have to be discussed with them.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'm just going to interject one question, which is, how much does the operation of this plant cost the YMCA?
So thank you, Chair. The costs are twofold. It's what we charge them, and some of the operational costs are funded by the YMCA directly. So the YMCA pays the hydro bill. I don't see it, and I don't actually know how much that is. They'll do maintenance on the fence and things like that, property taxes. We don't pay that. But what we charge them is the time that we go to the plant and any sampling costs or any parts associated to maintenance on the plant. And it's varied over the last few years, and it's noted in the Langdale asset management plan, other than last year, I believe. Last year was about $17,000 that we charged YMCA. Prior to that, I think it was about 12, and the few years prior to that were about $7,000.
Okay, so costs have been rising, but then the plant's getting older, so that also makes some sense. Director Seegers.
Thank you. So to Director Hiltz's comment as well, on page 2, when it says, given the ongoing operational financial benefit SDRD continues to receive, staff suggest it would explore financial options to compensate the YMCA for this service going forward. Would this feasibility study that you're looking at doing provide the information, or is there other information that would be required in order to be able to compensate them? Basically, it would be a trade-off, right? We're providing service, but they're providing us with this benefit. So some of that would, zero out. But how do we actually? What kinds of pieces do you need to put in place to be able to determine what that number is?
I think, Shane, please add if you would like to afterwards. But I think there are two pieces here in place. There is a long-term agreement that about ownership and operations of the facility that will need to be explored. And as part of that is the piece required for that is the feasibility study. That is the long-term piece. Then there's a short, there's a more immediate piece where, due to the current lack of occupants at the YMCA camp, there is no flow coming from that side. So the entire operations of the plant is to support the Langdale residents. While currently, it used to be that we were paying them. They were paying some operational expenditures, and we were billing them from some of the time we spent to operate the plant. So because there's no flow coming currently from the YMCA, what we're suggesting is for this year specifically, due to the unusual circumstances with COVID, to see if there's any option within the current funding systems, funding available for this plant, to compensate them a little bit for what we otherwise would have billed them. Normally, last year we billed them $15,000. This year, the bill might be in a similar order of magnitude, while they're actually getting no service in return because they have no occupants. So it would really be for a solution for this year.
And if I can add to that, please. So Remco's right, like that's been part of the problem up until now, that there's no actual formal agreement about rates or costs if they were to hook up to the regional system. But this year it's obvious that there's basically no flow from their camp into the plant.
Okay.
So follow up, just a follow up then. So do you anticipate coming back fairly soon with some kind of recommendation to the committee or to the board to move something forward fairly quickly?
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping the feasibility study will address that, and it depends on how quickly the feasibility study takes. If the feasibility study says don't connect and go on your own and do something else, it'll be a different discussion.
But what I think the question is for this year, I think yes.
So I'll ask a process question here. Do we need to refer this, say, to finance, or can we expect a recommendation coming forward to a future meeting?
What if you are okay with us moving forward with exploring some options, we'll bring back a report back to a future committee with a clear recommendation on how to proceed.
Good. Thank you very much. Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a really good project about thinking outside of the box, and I'm happy that the YMCA camp was willing to even entertain it, and I think, you know, this could end up being a win-win. I think the engineering study is necessary to get going to the next step. One question I have is around grants and no grants, and considering that I assume it's always staff that's writing these grants, and it's always for the same thing, and yet some wastewater treatment areas get one and some don't, and I'm just wondering if there's a way of getting some equity across the system, whether we pool those grant funds amongst all the wastewater treatment areas, or whether we, because I think it's a little bit unfair that some of them get it and some of them don't, and it's just sort of at the whim of the BC government and how much funding they have available.
The only comment I can provide there is the fact that by law we are required to have service areas per wastewater plant, and that's really what's limiting us to have to apply for a grant for all plants. We've been struggling and looking into this item as well, because any opportunity we can find to actually amalgamate grant opportunities, we'll for sure do. And there might be some opportunities to apply for one grant, but then, for example, construction period projects need to be also in a similar stage of development. So there might be opportunities, but in this case it wasn't, so that's why we had to apply 6 times or 7 times, and we're only lucky 2 out of those. So.
Okay, Director Lee.
My question was actually not on the grants, but I think most of our grants applications for these wastewater plants are because of major component failures. And I don't believe you can get a grant that says, okay, we're going to keep some of this for 5 or 10 years because this one might fail. So I think grants by their very nature are opportunistic rather than something we can use as long-term capital planning. So I think that's just something we generally have to accept. I do know that right now we're applying for some grants, which are a little bit unusual, to do feasibility studies. We don't have to do feasibility studies on plants if we in fact had our asset management completed. So this is kind of, I guess, what I would say is a one-term or one-time issue right now to get our asset management plans together. But that's my comments on grants. But my question specifically started out to be, I was trying to understand the funding split between the Langdale and the YMCA, because right now, I guess the way we would have been going is make two separate service areas. I guess we don't have one for the YMCA yet because we haven't taken it over, but we do have one for the Langdale, I'm assuming. I was wondering why we needed to pump the effluent from the Langdale into the YMCA plant. I was thinking that they should simply be sharing an ocean outfall. But I guess my assumption or my guess is that the Langdale's not got a high enough output, like I think they call it 1010. So they have to use some of the YMCA plant right now before they can use the outfall. I guess this $7,500 study would decide whether you would upgrade the Langdale plant and just use the outfall, or whether you'd somehow, I can't see amalgamating the two because their designs are going to be different. And I don't know how you'd share in the costing of that. But anyways, any comments on that, Remco?
I'll defer. Shane, go ahead first.
So the effluent was being pumped to the YMCA plant in an emergency situation because the field was breaking out, which means the effluent was coming to the surface in some locations. So the YMCA plant was generous enough to let us hook it up in that emergency situation. Since that time, the RBC, with the rotating biological contactor in the Langdale plant itself, has had a failure. So what we're doing is we're pumping treatment plant effluent, septic tank effluent down to the YMCA plant, which is what they put into the plant as well. And so their plant is actually processing the effluent, and then it's discharging out of the outfall that goes across the YMCA land. Does that address all your questions?
Yes. Do you have an expectation of this study, or is it just wide open? Have you given them any guidelines on what you'd be looking for?
We haven't laid out the guidelines yet, but my expectation would be is that the Langdale plant needs to be either rebuilt or connected to the YMCA system. The YMCA system was actually designed for a train, some more components to be installed for the SCRD if an agreement was ever made. So there are options there: rebuild the Langdale plant and field, or connect to the YMCA plant and possibly upgrade the plant.
And that connection would be out of the septic tank itself. So most of the treatment would be done at the YMCA plant then?
Yeah, the tankage at Langdale right now is basically being used like a septic tank. It's used to settle out the solids, and the gray water goes down to the plant to be treated. And then at intervals, we have to pump out the Langdale tank, just like you would a home septic tank.
Thank you.
Okay, not an optimal situation. I will note at the top of page 2 of the agenda, it refers to the June 22nd CAS. That's not on June 22nd. I was getting very confused. It's on June 25th.
Apologies.
Okay. My other question, because the septic system public meetings for, I think it was Sunnyside and Langdale were combined, I got to meet some of the Langdale residents at the public meeting and noted that they are not very happy with this situation. So I think that anything that we can do to expedite a solution would be very much appreciated. I see Director Hiltz's hand.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, expediting and I think as in Director Lee, to understand all the various bits and pieces, being on the ground would be a way to see how the flow works. So yeah, I would very much look forward to a site visit of some sort so we can kind of get a spatial understanding of how it flows. And just to move the business of this item forward, I would like to adjust the recommendation with an and that staff explore financial options. I don't necessarily like the word compensate. I would just like to explore some financial options of like cost sharing or something like that. Compensate sounds like a larger chunk for some reason. I'm not sure why. Compensate seems to be it's more of an exploration of cost sharing, I think, is what we're looking at. Because I think the people in the Langdale subdivision might be wondering why we're paying for the YMCA service and so on and so on. So that would be an and that staff explore financial options to cost share with YMCA during this. It's a fixed period. It's for 2020 would be the period. So that would be an and that in the recommendation, and then I would move the other recommendation as on page 1.
May I suggest an amendment to that?
An adjustment?
Yeah, adjustment. Instead of compensate, in support of, because there is currently a model in place how there's cost sharing, there's currently cost sharing. So maybe explore options to financially support the YMCA for their contribution to the service moving forward, or in 2020.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I can't see the words, I'm trying to think of the words, but if the chair could check with Tracy to see what we got for some language there.
Yes. Tracy, do you have a motion that you can read back to us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And further, that staff explore financial options to support the YMCA for their contribution for this service for 2020.
All right, is the mover happy?
I think that works, yeah.
Do we have a seconder? I see a seconder.
Yay, thank you.
And I recognize Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I was trying to think of what the long-term solution might look like, and I was wondering if this, in support of this motion, 2020 is an interim. It looks to me like it could be both a single service area between Langdale and the YMCA could be the outcome. I don't think the motion, I just would like to get Remco's thoughts on the fact that the motion wouldn't be eliminating that as a long-term solution. That's probably one of the things we are actually investigating with the 7,500 is what the solution will be, including the service area and who pays what.
Yes, that's correct. The long-term objective of the feasibility study would be to confirm what the financial and operational and arrangement would be long-term, and if there would be a long-term, there would be some form of connection between the UMCA and Langdale system. Several agreements will need to be in place, like cost-sharing agreements, long-term, etc., etc. So that's why this would be really for this year, and in the meantime, we work on the other pieces, including service area definitions, etc., etc.
Thank you.
Director Hiltz.
Yeah, further to Director Lee's, the Langdale treatment facility has a large disposal field. It might be an acre in size, and there is also a secondary backup lot. So there is some land involved in this service area, and so I'm expecting that the feasibility would look at both the land and the service area joining, which was back when the public was first looking at this in 2010. That was kind of why the SCRD signed on to the outfall was that was a likely direction to go. But as we could say, a lot of water has passed through the bridge, under the bridge at this point. So yeah, it's not as straightforward as it was in 2010. Yeah.
But the land component will be included indeed in the work we're adventuring on.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, no community hall is involved. So I see no further hands, so I'm going to call the question. This is rural directors voting only. All in favor of the motion on the floor? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I have a follow-up question, which is, do we have a communications plan for the residents who are on the Langdale system?
Currently, for this, the feasibility study, no, it's part of our plan. Once we have a feasibility study with options, of course, after input from the board.
I would just, you know, encourage staff to keep residents aware that a feasibility study is underway, because there's a fair amount of anxiety in the neighborhood about this.
Okay. Noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Director Hiltz, your hand is up.
Yes, in terms of, if I may ask you, Director McMahon, about Wood Creek Park, as a group, the Langdale residents are I would call organized but unorganized. They don't have an official kind of group. Was there any formation of anything with respect to kind of a subcommittee or something with any of the other wastewater facilities in the regional district that have kind of have a model of how they communicate? Does anyone? I'm looking for advice, because I think I'm gonna have to talk to the residents and figure out a way to kind of tidy up this communication piece.
A neighborhood association would be a wonderful idea if they want to go forward with that. Shared sewage turns out to be a motivator in neighborhood togetherness. And it's worked out very well with Wood Creek Park, even though not everybody in that neighborhood is on the system. Any other suggestions from any other directors? Not seeing any right off the hand. Perhaps talking to the Naomi Fleshett and the
Resilient Community.
That's it.
Resilient Coast. Sorry.
This might be an ideal group for the Resilient Coast to take on. It's a distinct neighborhood geographically, and they share some pressing issues. Director Lee?
Yes, I've been struggling with that concept. We have a lot of wastewater plants here in the Pender area because it's really rocky and not everybody can have their own septic field. But we also have some large wastewater plants that are isolated from each other. And I don't quite know how you get the planning together to make large community wastewater systems, which I think really this one we're talking about is a smaller amalgamation of two systems, so everybody wins. But eventually, communities would like to be like Seashell in that they serve the greater community. And I don't know how rural districts get there when we develop each one in isolation, and essentially we develop them because of subdivisions, not because of a community plan. So if anybody had any idea how you'd get there, I could sure appreciate that, because it's a problem that I've been trying to struggle to figure out how we do that, other than someone like an area director pulling everybody together and saying, do you want to do this, which doesn't seem like the most optimal solution.
Director Toth?
Yeah, a question, I suppose, for GM Rosenboom. Seashelt's embarking on a liquid waste management plan, and I'm wondering if rural areas or the Sunshine Coast Regional District as a whole can look at liquid waste management plans. Just speaking to Director Lee's comments about amalgamating systems in an area.
Thank you for the question. I was making some notes on that because there is currently no planning process in place around wastewater treatment. And parts of it is the way services are established, the way services are coming to us, and it also depends on how what the appetite is and what the potential is for future expansion of or future needs, even for the SRD to consider taking over those plans. So I think there are several pieces to it. There's currently no planning process in place, and as you indicated, to date it has been primarily developer subdivision. There's a new plant being built, and the SRD decided to take it over.
I would very much agree with this. We should look at our own cumulative impacts as well as, urging the province to do it. I was just wondering what our involvement in Seashelt's planning process is, because of course everybody in the rural areas who has their septic tank pumped is sending it to Seashelt.
I think the board approved. The board approved and I think it was one of the directors. I'm not sure who it was, to be on the steering committee for the liquid waste management plan, and we have staff representation as well participating.
That's great. And I hope we all remember who it was. I don't think it was me. Just, we'll perhaps someone can follow up with us and tell us what we volunteered for that we've forgotten. So next item up on our agenda is the Seashelt Landfill ground disturbance update. And I believe over to Mr. Rosenboom again.
Yes, I will introduce this report. Thank you, Chair. I will introduce this report with a presentation, which primarily has the same information as the report, but I thought for the purpose of transparency, I put it in the presentation as well. So I'm going to share my screen. And let's see if it works. Okay. So the this is really an update on the situation at the landfill in terms of the ground disturbance. And I would like to recognize that I worked on this file the last several months with Arun Kumar, our manager of solid waste operations, which is joining us as well for this meeting. So this is the aerial of the drop-off area, the public drop-off area at Seashelt. I think you can all follow my mouse. This is Dusty Road. This is the scale. Residents used to drive up here and could deposit all kind of waste here, drive up to a raised area. This was where the hazardous materials were stored, and we drive back along the share shed, and this was the exit lane moving out. And commercial trucks, residential curbside collection trucks were going over scale and then immediately up to the active phase. So last year, May, summer-ish, we identified the first sinkholes in the proximity of the share shed, primarily underneath the share shed. And over time, they expanded beside the share shed. And we did an assessment and we got a quote, and it resulted in a budget proposal being prepared for the 2020 budget process. And then in the midst of that budget process, another sinkhole developed here. With an excavator, we opened it up a little bit to see what was underneath. And the white stuff here is paste-like material, which is the old drywall that was deposited here, and this was a deep cavity underneath here. Subsequently, we immediately did some further testing here, and we identified some other areas of concern there. And while we were doing it, or about the same time, another sinkhole appeared here in the midst of our exit lane. We cornered it off immediately, and I have to say, all of these two events in the upper loading area as well as the exit lane were in January. We had a lot of rain, so the ground was really saturated, and in both cases these area have a lot of traffic on them. So I think those were two contributing factors to the fact that these sinkholes occurred. So immediately, okay, I can go back to that. So the real cause, what we have been able to identify, is that in this area that used to be part of the active landfill and is not anymore, there was a lot of drywall deposited. Drywall was accepted at the landfill until the mid-1990s, so until about 25 years ago. Drywall was being deposited in the area, and over time, due to rain and water and groundwater and whatever, that drywall has deteriorated into a paste-like substance with a smaller volume than the original one. As a result, cavities, voids are being created underneath that area of the landfill, and the safety risk associated with those voids is really dependent on how big they are and the strength of the soil layer on top, the amount of soil, the material composition, the thickness of it, as well as the usage of the area by traffic. If there's a lot of pressure on top, that's of course different than if there's a lower use area. So we did with ground penetrating radar, we surveyed the entire drop-off area and identified some larger voids areas in the upper loading area and around the shared exit lane area, and smaller potential voids in the entire drop-off area. And so we concluded that there is an ongoing risk for depression sinkholes in the entire area. The reason why I say depressions / sinkholes, if it could very well be that a void slowly just dips in and creates a depression, and we just fill it up with gravel and we haven't even noticed that there was actually a void there. It's just some settlement. While sinkhole is actually that sudden event that can really cause a safety issue to occur. So this is a picture of the landfill as of last week. What we did is, if you can follow my mouse, this upper area, we entirely closed it off. It's currently not being used, and we concentrated the drop-off area in this area here at the front. So we reduced the area, we reconfigured our entire operations. Instead of using full-size bins, we're using now low-rise bins, where residents can drop in the materials themselves directly from the car instead of that from an elevated platform. It resulted in us needing to require additional trucks to empty those bins because they are full way more quickly than a full-size bin, and it definitely temporarily required some extra staff time to manage this entire situation and the transition. So we also looked at remediation options, and I have to say that the entire area is outside of the current landfill area. So we're not able to use this area to bury any more waste. And that has been the case since 1997, and it's also not allowed under our current permits from the ministry. So we looked at alternatives, and we had a consultant supporting us, and we identified 3 methods that could be applied to remediate the area in terms of their voids. One is a rapid impact compaction, which is an excavator with a big hammer attached, and that really pounds the ground, and any voids would collapse as a result of it. It would require a temporary closure of the entire drop-off area, and given the vibrations involved, we cannot use it close to or underneath existing infrastructure. Another option is to expose and cover the entire area. It's just with an excavator opening up the entire area and filling all the voids and closing it off again. And the other one is filling all the voids with grout, which is just cement concrete mixture. So the picture here is really drilling, and every meter just drill and see if you can, if there's a void. If there's a void, you put concrete of grout in it and treat the entire area that way. In terms of cost and other implications, they range really between $500,000, million to over $1 million for the treatment itself. But for the rapid impact compaction, and we're really expose and cover the entire area, because they are not suitable to be applied underneath infrastructure, there will be other costs associated with that to treat the area underneath those the existing infrastructure. And there is an additional cost to redevelop the entire area as well. So in total, cheapest option is what we've been able to identify so far is far over $1 million. So we've been looking at what can we do differently. One of the options is, can we have a drop-off area at smaller size and a smaller area than the original one, which would significantly reduce the remediation costs and redevelopment costs. Other item to explore is, can we proceed with the long-term with the current operations with low-rise winds, and what would the additional financial impact be from using those winds and the additional trucking costs and potentially staffing costs associated with that. There are different design options for a drop-off area, as our consultant described it. We can develop it as a cheap car that can last us 5-6 years until the landfill closes, or we can, and that's the last question, we can design something that is of a higher standard, better quality, but it might also has a function long-term if the landfill is closed, and potentially there's an appetite to develop a transfer station at this location. So in terms of how that would look like from the air, the orange area is the area we're currently using, and one of the options for a reduced size would be to limit it to this area, or maybe expand it slightly into the red area. In all the options we're currently are exploring is to avoid redeveloping or remediating the entire purple area, which is the area with the highest amount of voids and most complex and expensive to remediate. And so the purpose of today's meeting is not to really seek direction from the board on options. It's more to have a discussion, provide information. Next week at the Corporate Administrative Services meeting will provide a financial update on the expenditures to date and anticipated expenditures in upcoming 6 months until the end of this project. In July, we hope to get back with a report on actual remediation and infrastructure options and seek direction from the board on how to move forward, which will then result in design and procurement of contractors and equipment in August-October period, and the actual remediation to be completed in November-December. This is a tight time frame, and the tight time frame is really driven by the fact that we want this, as well, the safety issue addressed as soon as possible, as well as that we would like to get back to a more long-term permanent operational procedure and regime at the landfill. And this was my presentation.
Okay, I imagine there will be questions about this. I'll start with Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the rapid impact compaction, I guess it'd probably be a good idea for the excavator to not be standing over the middle of the void while he gets going. But the question I have is, I guess once the void is collapsed, it will probably last, and that will probably need to be backfilled, and then it will probably last until the landfill is retired. Is that is that the theory? Because maybe this drywall isn't quite done compacting, but any future voids will probably last the 6 years remaining.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a good question. I could have addressed it as well in the presentation. Is that the expectation is really that because it was about 25 years ago that the last drywall was deposited in the landfill, we expect that most of the materials, most of the drywall is currently deteriorated into that paste-like material. So I don't expect that a lot of new voids would develop in the next in future, and I think the rapid impact compaction method is treating an area of between 6 and 9 feet deep. So any potential gaps there with some drywall that is still to be transformed into paste-like mass will definitely be compacted as well. So once the area is remediated, it's solid for the future.
And just to add to that, Remco, the first part of the question was the machine sitting on top of the void. So these machines are track-based machines with low ground pressure units and wide pads installed. So there isn't much of a concern with the machine actually breaking through.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, no machines will be swallowed. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, sir. Thank you very much for the presentation. The visuals really helped to give me a spatial understanding of the problem. My question is how does the Ministry of Environment get involved? Do they get involved in this, or they just see this as an SCRD problem, solve it yourself, or do they have any role in this project? And I guess I'm also wondering about MIA and how they would be looking at the liability aspects of and risks to the regional district. So are there partners, Ministry of Environment and MIA? What would they be saying about this?
Thank you for that question. The Ministry of Environment, because this is outside of the actual current active landfill area, they see this as more and as an SRD matter to address. So from a regulatory perspective, it's SRD leased land, it's ground land. So there is no limitation on that, on us doing this, redeveloping this area from their perspective. In terms of MIA's involvement, MIA is aware of the situation and will continue to keep them updated on what we do.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question, and that is there anywhere nearby that we could move the drop-off area to?
We looked at options. In the close proximity, there is none. All the area around the landfill is part of the immediate area, is part of the lands that will be transferred to the Sechelt Nation as part of the land transfer agreement and the foundation agreement. So any land for the development of a new transfer station would need to be found within the boundaries of the district of Sechelt.
Sure, that's just what Sechelt needs. Director Lee.
My question was very similar to Donna's, except I was thinking that there's that Forest Service Road and there's land to the north of the Forest Service Road. Would that land on that side still be part of the land transfer to the Sechelt Nation?
Yes, that's correct. And what we've been to add a little bit more on the question on a transfer site on another location. That's part of the consideration that to be given to what is the long-term future for having even a transfer station or a drop-off area in the Sechelt area. If and that's related to the outcomes of the landfill option analysis project that is happening this year. It's really like we have three options for our solid waste long term when our landfill is closed. Bring it to a new landfill, bring it to a waste to energy facility, or exporting it for burial at another locations. Most likely, two of those three locations would require barging of material from most likely somewhere along the south coast, because that's a location where large barges can be moored and can be loaded. So from that perspective, there might be a benefit to have a transfer station in the Sechelt area for residents of that live here. And from that perspective, there might be a long-term purpose if we would develop this area into a drop-off area that can be transformed into a full-blown transfer station when the landfill is closed. So we looked at that option as well, and such transfer station can be developed at the landfill site and or at another location. If you do it at the landfill site, you would need to remediate the area. If you do it on a location, you might need to acquire the ground. In all cases, everything will depend on the outcome of the landfill options analysis, as well as the update to the solid waste management plan. But that's a long-term thinking. But for the short-term decisions, it's really like, yeah, that's part of the report that we're going to do, the analysis. For the analysis we're going to do, what would be the cost to something on the landfill itself that would last, that would have a function past the lifespan of the landfill itself.
Thank you. I think everybody is reluctant to spend $1 million on something that's going to close in 5 to 6 years. I would be interested in the report in seeing the GHG impacts or costs of the various solutions, because we should be, looking at our GHG emissions for any projects that we are undertaking to get a rough idea of what they are. I am not seeing any further comments in the queue. We do not have any motions or recommendations on the table. So I think it's time to move on to the next agenda item, which is the PMAC meeting minutes. We have previously received. Are there any items of business arising from those minutes that anybody would like to see addressed? Not seeing a rush to the mic. So next item on the agenda is communications from the town of Gibsons. Does anybody want to give a brief introduction to this or any comments on it? Don't all speak at once. Mr. Rosenboom.
It's not really only associated with the drought management plan, but I want to give the committee a brief update that I spoke with senior management in from the town of Gibsons, and it's anticipated that pending delivery of some critical parts, they anticipate that they can provide their zone 3 with their water somewhere within the next 4 weeks. And STAV staff will provide an update report on the operational and financial implications to the SRD at our July Infrastructure Services meeting.
That's exciting news.
Yep.
Yeah, we should have a celebration of some sort at a distance, outdoors.
I know that I've spoken about that with the town, and they're trying to do some sort of ribbon cutting, virtual or in person. There we go. There's something in the making, and we'll be involved.
Super. We look forward to it. Thank you very much. And thank you to our partners, the town of Gibsons, for moving this forward. This could be a real savior this summer, since we don't know what our water situation is going to be. So I am not seeing anything further on the agenda. Are we done? If we're done, a motion to adjourn would be in order. I see a motion to adjourn. I see a seconder. All in favor of adjournment? Oh, look at that. We're all for it. Do we have any public questions?
There hasn't been anyone in the public gallery today.
Okay, and we haven't had anything further by email, I take it. So.
No, nothing by text. Just I had Sophie on texting earlier, but she has no questions at this point.
Super. Thank you, everybody. It was fun. Let's do this again real soon.